Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Robert Bale, our Director of Communications at NUCA. Welcome to our latest webinar Wednesday, sponsored by NUCA member Hub International. Today's webinar, Preparing for the Next Phase, Critical Considerations for the Construction Industry, addresses today's unprecedented challenges for contractors returning to job sites at this stage of the COVID-19 pandemic. Contractors will have to address these two major considerations and challenges: the health and safety of their employees and the management of health and safety in their workplace. On our webinar, Hub's experts will review the government's guidance on screening employees and job candidates for COVID-19. We also talk about other employee relations concerns, including harassment and discrimination in the workplace. Today's webinar will also provide NUCA members with best practices to manage the safety of their employees in the construction workplace. We will discuss construction plan guidance, alternative scheduling, disinfecting and cleaning, subcontractor management, and physical workspace consideration. Hub's experts will also share tools and resources that you can adopt for your use in your own construction business as you return to work. Our webinar presenters today include Carrie Chirvani, who is Hub's International Senior Vice President and Chief Compliance Officer for Employee Benefits. Shannon Crawford is Senior Risk Services Consultant for Hub International. Based in Nashville, he delivers a multi-year background in risk control and job site safety surveys for contractor clients across the South. Finally, Rand Thomas is Hub's Commercial Insurance Advisor for Hub International's Mid-South region. His work includes advising on the variety of employee benefits available to contractor businesses and business insurance products. Now let's get started. Carrie, I turn the webinar over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. I'm Chirvani, and Shannon, Rand, and I all hope that we will deliver something useful and meaningful to you. And if we don't, well, you maybe got an hour of humor and some break in your day. One way or the other, we're going to try to be useful to you. So, of course, we have to give our disclaimer, and they leave it up to the lawyer to do so. This is not legal advice. This is merely educational and hopefully helpful and instructive content for you. First, we're going to kick off with Rand, who's going to talk about the state of the market. Then we're going to move to me, and I'll talk to you about employee relations, and then on to Shannon to talk about safety and employer risk. So that you can see what we all look like and know that we're real people. Here are our pictures and our names. And we're looking forward to chatting with you today. So Rand, if you will kick it off, please.
Awesome. Thanks, Carrie, and thank you, Bob. Appreciate all the members joining us today. I think we've got some great content revolving around the pandemic to cover. Like Carrie said, hope you find this informative and just gets you thinking about how to be prepared for the next step. So our nation's going through some unprecedented changes, and we believe the topics we discuss will be important for NUCA companies as they prepare for that next challenge. So I'll quickly move through my section just to leave time for our experts in Carrie and Shannon. But if you go ahead, thank you. So the state of the market, it's one that we've not seen in nearly 20 years. We're truly in a hard insurance market. And what does that mean to you guys? A couple things. Don't like to hear it, but one is increased premiums. The auto insurance premiums have been increasing for 35 quarters in a row. I don't think anybody is blind to that fact, and I'm confident that that'll continue to be the trend for the foreseeable future. The reasoning for that is a couple things: the rise in repair cost of vehicles, distracted driving, and most notably social inflation. Social inflation is what we define as the rising cost of insurance claims due to plaintiff-friendly rulings and large jury awards. So that's what's driving the auto piece. The property insurance premiums are also continuing to rise, primarily due to some major catastrophic losses over the last 5 years or so. We've had wildfires, hurricanes, and tornadoes that are all resulting in the largest property premium increases we've seen in a long time. So as a result of the social inflation and underlying limits, umbrella premiums are also on the rise. Carriers are choosing to either get rate and then in some cases even stepping away from larger limits entirely. Insurers at the second layer of umbrellas are looking at higher attachment points as well. So just something to be mindful of. Workers' compensation premiums are by and large trending down, which is a positive thing. Reduced claim severity and frequency are all factors in that. And it's truthfully the safety programs and protocols that y'all are putting in place on the front lines that are reducing those claim severity. And so those reduced premiums are sometimes helping to offset the rises in other lines. But what else can you do about the rise in premiums is work with your broker, make sure that they're proactively discussing your risk well ahead of renewal time. And don't be surprised when renewal time does come if there are more strict underwriting guidelines. They could potentially be asking deeper questions that go into your operations or non-renewing accounts entirely, regardless of how long you've had a relationship with your carrier. And if we move to the next slide, much like the property and casualty line, surety landscape is changing as well, and that's directly due to the pandemic. There's been a trend of more jobs requiring surety bonds. If you're not already seeing this as a requirement at your sub level, I advise you to be prepared for that. The pandemic has really pushed this into a hard market. So regardless of your current surety relationship, you can expect tighter underwriting. This might mean interim financials as opposed to just year-end financials. And I would strongly suggest that if you don't already, get a backup surety in place so that they can step in if you need them in a last-minute situation. And then lastly, I want to discuss operations. Carrie's going to talk a lot about this, but expect pandemic wording to be included in all future contracts. It's important that you read all your contracts carefully and be sure your broker reviews them as well. It's important to have a construction-specific broker to review these contracts. But that being said, they can only advise on the requirements from an insurance perspective, and you'll need your lawyer to actually review the contracts in their entirety. These contracts will also probably include safety protocols as it relates to the pandemic. Shannon will be speaking on what these could and should look like. And it's just important to consider the impact these added safety measures might have on your job. So I hope this information is helpful. Please feel free to reach out to me. Without any further ado, I'll pass it on to Carrie.
Thanks, Rand. So hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Shervini. My background is both in employment law and employee benefits, and at Hub, I am a consultant that helps our clients navigate employment law, employee benefit regulations, and in the last 5 months, my role has been about 99% focused on COVID and assisting clients in managing the response to COVID initially, and then identifying protocols, approaches, and response measures to COVID in the workplace in particular, bringing people back to work, dealing with positive tests, dealing with diagnosis, dealing with symptoms, and all the regulatory world around it. So today, I'm hoping that I share with you some of that wisdom, some lessons learned, and I've built my program differently than you're probably used to. And so I'll move right in, and each of my slides are filled with questions, the common questions that I'm getting from clients around managing their workplace on a topic by topic basis. I feel like this is more responsive to what's really happening and will hopefully be more responsive to your real world, tangible, practical, day-to-day issues and needs. So I start with the topic of employee screening. And I want to lay some foundation here and preface this section specifically around the larger conversation of the kinds of litigation that you may or may not see as an employer. Now, in the construction industry, I am sure you guys are pretty familiar with negligence claims, especially with respect to safety or with respect to customers or third parties coming on site. What's new and unique about COVID is that we're seeing negligence claims being brought forth by employees against employers. Now, why is that new and unique? Because generally speaking, when an employee is injured at work, you guys are familiar with this, you file it with your work comp carrier. When an employee contracts COVID, if they attempt to connect that contraction of COVID to the workplace and try to file a work comp claim, the carrier is going to deny it. The work comp carriers, for the most part, are not covering COVID-19 in the workplace. And The reason behind that makes a little bit of sense, right? It's the same reason why you can't file a work comp claim for the flu, because you could get the flu at Whole Foods or at, the Acme Company in Nashville or anywhere else out in public, Target, Walmart, whatever, your friend's house. So it's very hard to demonstrate that you got the flu because of the course and scope of employment. COVID is the same way. You could get COVID in a number of different ways. And under work comp, it's a high legal standard where you have to demonstrate a causal connection between the diagnosis and the condition itself. So since there's no work comp coverage, something happens, and that is the gates are open now for employees to sue employers outside of the work comp. There's no work comp exclusive remedy available anymore because work comp has denied the claim. And outside of work comp, they're suing their employers for negligence, claiming that the employer didn't do what they needed to do to keep the workplace safe. So as I talk to you today about screening and masks and safety protocols, and Shannon's going to talk to you about specific operational safety protocols, remember that this is all about a comprehensive, robust safety and health plan for your workplace. The more stuff you can put in that bucket of safety, the stronger defense you have in the event that the employee tries to sue you under negligence. The good news about negligence claims is, if there's any, that you can do something today to avoid, prevent, and if there is a claim, defend against it. And that is build the most comprehensive, robust, thorough safety program you can now to try to get ahead of the claims and have a viable, solid defense in the event that there's litigation. So when I talk to you today about employee screening, the more you do to screen your employees within the confines of the law, which I'm going to teach you today, the better your defense is in the event that there's litigation. So when clients come to me and say, I'm taking their temperature, that should be enough. I'm asking the medical question, that should be enough. I'm going to have them tested once a month, that should be enough. Not any one of these things is enough. I can't tell you that any complete program is enough, but the more you put in that bucket, the closer you get to a stronger defense. So please don't think that, okay, I'm doing temperature checking, I'm good. That's not going to be enough, right? Temperature checking alone is not enough to ensure that you're keeping your workplace safe. In fact, we've already read that temperatures are not necessarily indicative of COVID, and there are lots of people who get COVID and have no fever whatsoever. So OSHA, CDC, Department of Labor all recommend that you engage in daily employee medical screening. What does that look like? You can work with a technology company to download an app and have employees answer questions every day on an app before they come in. You can do a tailgate meeting in the morning and have your health and safety officer on site wearing their protective personal equipment with their face mask and their gloves and their safety goggles, go through the safety protocol and questioning of the employees at the tailgate each morning before you release the workers onto the job site. You can use a third-party vendor to engage in the screening. However you want to approach this, you can screen your employees for COVID. Remember that the information that you gather is confidential. This is employee medical information. So these are not questions that you're going to be asking your employees within the earshot of 50 other people, so 50 other people know about the employee's medical condition. Remember, any documentation that you gather as part of the employee screening is confidential and should be kept in a separate personnel file. That's very important. Remember that employees must be held accountable. Later, we're going to talk about handbooks and acknowledgements, but employee screening may become an expectation of your daily morning routine or your daily tailgate safety protocol. Employees who don't attend, don't comply, don't work, right? You have safety rules just like you have OSHA health and safety rules for trenches or getting up on scaffolding or securing themselves on high rises or whatever your venue may be for construction. This is just another safety protocol and employees are expected to comply and to follow it. One of the big questions I get is around employees versus vendors and third parties visiting the site, especially in the construction world. You have all kinds of subcontractors coming on. You may have property owners coming on if it's residential. You have all kinds of third parties. You have a right, especially if you're the GC, to ensure that third parties are following your safety protocols, just like your corporate offices. If you've got people visiting you in your corporate offices, you have a right to require that they wear masks, that they go through temperature checking, that they go through pre-screening before you let them into your workplace. It's important that you're consistent in your safety protocols, because if you have one protocol for one set of people and a different protocol for another set of people, you've now created an argument that you knew better, right? You had this one stringent safety protocol for employees, but vendors didn't have to follow it. But you clearly knew that you needed to have a stringent safety protocol. What do you think a plaintiff lawyer is going to do with that information? So remember that the risk of COVID is tied to the human being, not the relationship. COVID doesn't care if it's your employee, the delivery person, or a subcontractor. The risk is tied to the human being, so your safety protocols have to be consistent across all people who come on property, come in close contact, or come into your office building. Hopefully that helps with respect to employee screening. Let's talk about PPE. And you guys, more than any other industry that I talk to, will appreciate the nuances here. I want to clarify a couple of things, first of all, which is our language. We all know, especially in construction, that PPE refers to a very specific subset of gear, right? N95 masks, respirators, OSHA health and safety standards for respirator use, and donning and doffing respirators. That is different than a face covering or a face mask. A face covering is a cloth covering. A face mask is a surgical mask. So when clients call me and say, I'm writing a PPE policy, they don't know or understand that they're talking about N95 respirators when they reference PPE. So as you guys build your policies and programs, this is no different than any other OSHA health and safety discussion around respirators or other personal protective equipment versus face coverings and face masks. OSHA actually released a short, a little confusing, but somewhat helpful, typical, right? OSHA document on the difference between face coverings, face masks, and respirators. If you're going to be writing SOPs, which I really recommend you do, be very clear about the difference and be clear in the language that you use. Don't require PPE of your employees if what you really mean is face covering or face mask. The other thing I want to put on your radar is the increasing mandatory nature of face coverings and face masks in general public areas. I can tell you, for example, I live in South Florida. I live in Palm Beach County. Right next to me is Martin County. Both counties have now made it mandatory for people to wear face coverings or face masks in general public areas. So pay attention to your local regulations. I think that for years, it's really been the federal regs that have dictated our safety protocols and how we run our businesses. And what's different now, I think, is that there's so much local variance and local regulatory activity at a level that we're not really used to seeing. So even though OSHA or the CDC does not consider face coverings or face masks mandatory and it's only highly recommended, your county or municipality may require face coverings or face masks. I have not heard of any state yet regulating the use of face coverings or face masks, but it wouldn't surprise me considering I now sit in a hotbed of coronavirus if Florida, for example, made it mandatory across the state. Again, whatever you do, I'm going to keep emphasizing this, you need to build these SOPs, build these policies, and be consistent in their application regardless of relationship, employee, vendor, third party, etc. Okay, this is a really big one. I have clients who are really excited about engaging in employee COVID testing. So let me delineate here between the different kinds of testing and help put some guardrails up here. There are two kinds of COVID tests that we hear about that are available. One is the diagnostic test that determines whether or not you have active COVID in your system. The other is the antibody test. The antibody test determines whether you previously may have had COVID and built up the antibodies to it. In the world of employment law, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission governs the kinds of information that you're allowed to have about your employees, especially with respect to medical information. And the specific law that sets those boundaries is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you may think, well, what does that have to do with COVID? It's not a disability. It may or may not be a disability, but nonetheless, the Americans with Disabilities Act governs what kind of information you're allowed to have with respect to your employees' medical conditions, regardless of whether or not your employee is disabled. So I tell you all of that because that's where these rules come from. And the rule is you can require diagnostic testing. You are allowed to have the diagnostic testing results, but you cannot require antibody testing, and you are not allowed to ask for the antibody testing results. Why? The whole point of testing is to reduce the community spread of COVID-19. You test an employee, for example, with symptoms because you need to determine whether or not they simply have the flu or a cold or allergies or have COVID-19 and need to be quarantined and go through a specific protocol before they can return to work. They go through all of these measures to ensure that you reduce the community spread of COVID-19. Antibody testing has nothing to do with the spread of COVID-19. If I happen to have the antibodies in my system, that does nothing to tell you whether or not I may become a threat to somebody else. It has no impact whatsoever on community spread. So as an employer, you can require diagnostic testing, you cannot require antibody testing, and you're not even entitled to the antibody testing results or information. That is a prohibited medical inquiry under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So when should you test? I am going to liken this to your drug-free workplace program. We're all familiar with reasonable suspicion testing. We're all familiar with for-cause testing, right? Somebody shows up at work, they smell like booze, you put them in an Uber, or somebody drives them to the drug lab and gets a COVID test. Somebody shows up at work hacking up a lung with a high fever, you can and may want to send them for a COVID test. Regardless, you're sending them off site. You're getting them off property, period. And we're going to talk about that on the next slide. But my recommendation to employers is use the diagnostic testing tool as you would reasonable suspicion or for-cause testing in the workplace. Somebody has symptoms, somebody's been exposed, you want to get them off property, you want to send them for a test, and then based on the test results, you'll determine when they can return to work, which we'll talk about in a minute. You don't have to do it that way. You don't have to use testing at all, but that's a viable, practical way to use diagnostic testing. I do have clients who want to test their employees every week or every month, and that's fine if you feel like you want to clear your population, but remember the test only tests for that moment in time, and if your employee leaves the lab and goes to the grocery store and the person in line behind them, this happened to me about 2 weeks ago, starts coughing and not social distancing, and trust me, I flipped. They may get COVID a minute after they got their test. So the test is only going to tell you where they were at the moment that they were in the lab, which is why reasonable suspicion may be a more practical way to use that kind of right and ability to manage risk in the workplace. All right, so let's talk about returning to work, testing, symptoms, the whole shebang. You've got employees who are working. In the construction industry, in many cases, it's virtually impossible to ensure social distancing. In fact, you'd be violating other OSHA regulations, other health and safety regulations in the workplace if you did social distance, for example, with scaffolding or slip and fall and protection or trenches or whatever it might be. And so In that case, if you've got an employee that shows up with symptoms or has been exposed, or even worse, has a positive test, you're going to have to take some pretty aggressive measures. And the first thing you're going to do is make sure that that employee is isolated and removed from the job site. The next thing you're going to do is talk to the employee about all of the people that that employee came in contact or close contact with. And by close contact, the CDC means within 6 feet for 10 minutes or longer without protective coverings, without a face mask or a face cloth. My recommendation is I would go even broader than that, anyone that they came in contact with or were around, period. Once you have the names of the people that the employee was around, you're going to tell them that they have come into contact with somebody who has symptoms of COVID and is being tested. You cannot reveal their identity. Please remember that employee medical information is confidential. I said this earlier and I'm saying it again. Even if they guess who the person is, you're still not going to confirm or deny. The only purpose of that conversation is, hey, you may have come into contact with somebody who may have COVID. They're getting a test. As soon as we know, we'll let you know. In the meantime, we recommend you go home, self-isolate, and self-monitor until we have an answer. Once the employee has the diagnosis, if it's positive, then they can return when they satisfy one of two CDC protocols. Either the test-based strategy, which is full resolution of symptoms and 2 negative tests at least 72 hours apart. And this is all on the CDC site. And we will send out a guide that we've developed that will help you guys with this. It's a simple 1-pager. We make it really easy for you. So we'll get that out to all of the attendees today. Or they can do a symptom-based strategy, which is solely focused on the passage of time and the resolution of symptoms. My point for you on this slide is that it's important that as soon as you believe you have an employee with symptoms, that employee is self-isolated. The people who came in contact with that employee are notified. And then the third thing you want to do, and Shannon will talk about this as well in far more detail, is disinfect and sanitize all of the equipment that the employee may have been near or utilized. In the job site, it could be heavy machinery, equipment, tools. In the corporate offices, it could be desks, coffee makers, copy machines, door handles, restrooms, you get it. There is very excellent guidance issued by the CDC that will be helpful to you. We're going to get that to you in that one piece that I mentioned. But again, guys, I can't emphasize enough that you've got to build your own SOPs and protocols around this and follow them religiously. Likewise, you want employees to sign off on those programs, and I will send that to you. I will talk about that in more detail in a couple more slides. Okay, job applicants. So you're working really hard to screen your employees, have safety protocols, have responsive measures if somebody shows up with symptoms or is tested positive. What about your job applicants? You know, they're kind of like stranger danger, right? What are you going to do about them? Well, the EEOC has been very clear that you can likewise screen your job applicants. If you have an applicant that tests positive, you can deny or delay that job until that employee is able to safely work. But remember, when you start testing job applicants, it's not any different than your medical pre-screening for a new hire. It's post-offer pre-start. So just consider this as part of your employment medical pre-screening protocol for all of your new hires. You've made an offer, you need to go through your physical exam, and you need to go through your COVID testing. And then depending on the results of all of those things, we'll determine when and if you can start working. Okay, recalling employees. This is where it gets particularly complicated. So I'm going to slow down for a minute and take this piece by piece. As a threshold matter, there's a number of employment laws that come into play here. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, age discrimination, pregnancy discrimination, and even the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. All of these are rules that govern the employment relationship. And it all connects back to the CDC's guidance around your high-risk employees. I can't tell you how many clients get on the phone with me and say, you know what, we're just going to keep all of our age 65 and above employees at home and let everyone else come back to work. You know what, we're not going to let any of our pregnant people come back to work. We're just going to let everybody else come back to work. And they're not meaning to discriminate. In fact, they're very, very well intended. And I really appreciate the effort to keep their employees safe. But nonetheless, that is still discrimination. You cannot treat people differently based on age, medical condition, or pregnancy, even if that makes them high risk. What you can do is offer to be flexible for employees who self-identify as having a concern about returning to the workplace. For example, if you have an employee with diabetes, if you've opened the door for employees to self-identify as concerned, and that employee says, hey, I have diabetes, I'm super afraid of coming back to work, then you would work with that employee to find an accommodation to keep them safe, but keep them working. Likewise, with employees age 65 and older, is there a way, if an employee says, hey, I'm 70, I'm really concerned, how can you keep that employee safe, but keep them working? Same with pregnancy. We had an employee that was 6 months pregnant, and she was the controller for the company. So she had to be in the office to sign checks, but she sat in a cube. And so the employer booted someone out of an office, put her in the office, got her a mini fridge and a coffee maker, and she locked herself away. Employees came in with masks on and socially distanced, dropped off materials for her to sign checks, and she was able to be safe and come back to work. So your obligation is to identify ways to bring people back to work and do it safely, but you can't categorically exclude people based on varying protected classes like medical condition, pregnancy, or age. The other thing you're not allowed to do, guys, is you cannot ask employees about family medical conditions. So if you want to ask employees if they've been exposed to anyone with COVID or COVID symptoms, that's okay. But you can't ask if they've been exposed to a family member. And really, family member is not a big enough question anyway. It doesn't matter if they're a family member or not. What you need to know is if the employee's been exposed, not whether or not it's a family member. The last thing I want to put on your radar for this slide, and then I'll wrap up with some best practices, is national origin discrimination. We are seeing a real uptick in discrimination against Asian Americans based on the conversations around the source or the cause of COVID-19. Regardless of your personal opinion, you cannot discriminate against individuals based on their national origin of any kind, Asian American or European or Italian or French or regardless, right? And so you just want to be sure that if you hear any kind of comments or conversations or disparaging, discriminatory remarks, that you put a stop to it, because it does violate Title VII, and in the workplace, that is an illegal kind of conversation. All right, so where do you go from here? Some tips. Number one, make sure that your policy is really clear with respect to employees who are required to work from home or employees required to take time off and be at home. For example, if you have a front-end loader operator who tests positive with COVID and there's no other protection or wage replacement benefits for them, are they required to use PTO? What does your policy say? Be sure that your remote workers understand their obligation to report their hours. We're seeing a huge increase in non-exempt employee wage and hour litigation because they're arguing or claiming that they're not being paid for all of their hours worked when they work from home. Be sure that your safety protocols are documented, distributed, memorialized, circulated, and that there's accountability. Employees need to sign acknowledgement forms. They understand the rules. They understand they have to follow the rules, and they understand if they don't follow the rules, there will be discipline up to and including termination. Be very clear. Don't use vague language. Routinely cleaning. Well, routinely cleaning for me is about every hour. Routinely cleaning for my husband is about every month. So what do you mean by routinely cleaning? Everybody has different definitions. Make sure that you're adhering to the Americans with Disabilities Act and make sure that as you bring people back to work, if your leadership and managers are taking on more non-exempt hourly type duties, that you're not jeopardizing their classification. So I know that's a lot. There's a lot of moving parts. We have some great materials to get you that I think will put some more concreteness to this. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shannon, who's going to talk more about health and safety and operations. Shannon, thanks.
Thanks, Carrie. Great job. Tough act to follow, but we'll do our best. So my name's Shannon Crawford. One of the risk services consultants with Hub Mid-South. I work out of the Nashville office. So we're going to talk about safety and employer risk today, trying to get folks back to work and see if we can be some help to you guys. All right, go ahead, Carrie. So obviously we all have a goal of returning to work. Some of you may already be working. Some of you might have continued to work the whole time, but for those of you who have not, of course, our goal is to return back to work, get our folks back to work, but the main goal is to do that safely, and that's kind of what we're going to be concentrating on today. So, of course, protecting our people is probably going to be our utmost concern, getting them back, but getting them back safely, and we'll talk about some measures to do that, hopefully. Along with that, we want to protect our property and manage our business well through this crisis. It's difficult for everyone. Our business I come in contact with, having some challenges, but we're trying to help folks with that. During this process, of course, we want to sustain or maintain our reputation. Any kind of event can affect our company's reputation. Many of you have been in business for many years and, of course, want to maintain that. So how we handle crises and other events can obviously have a positive effect on that. That's what we want to try to do. And again, our goal is to resume normal operations, whatever that looks like for you. And Carrie talked about these other 2 points some already, being cognizant of returning to work safely, but in aspect from our suppliers, vendors, things like that, but others who come on our site, and then customers who may come onto our sites, whoever those are, if it's salespeople or people we're servicing or whatever, offering protection on all fronts. That's kind of what we're looking at today. Okay, Carrie. So we're going to talk about some best practices. These are not all the best practices, but these are some that we've thought of for you in these 6 categories listed here. And we'll go through each of these, but developing a pandemic or return to work plan, we always talk about having a plan before issues happen. Probably difficult in this case, not having dealt with coronavirus or COVID before, but we'll talk about some of that going forward. Employee monitoring, which Carrie's discussed a little bit so far. How to minimize site exposures. We'll talk more about those contractor exposures and management contractors, subcontractors that may be working for you. Then the cleaning and disinfecting portion of the coronavirus, preventing that. So we'll talk about that some as well. And then the cycle that we always see with any kind of program that we have, whether it's quality, production, whatever, is planning and then organizing, evaluating, responding. We'll talk about each of those. Okay, next. So we mentioned the plan. You should have a plan, return to work plan. Always want to plan before things happen. So within that plan, there's going to be responsibilities for different folks. The managers are going to have responsibilities. Employees, if you have a safety person, they're going to have responsibilities as well. The return to work plan is going to obviously include employee safety. We'll talk more about that. Job site protective measures, what those will look like. Of course, you're going to already have your safety rules, and Carrie mentioned that already, the importance of having safety policies and getting those out to folks. You're going to need to add this Corona, COVID-19 to that and controls there. Again, mentioning job site visitors, how we're going to control that. Visitors coming to the sites, hopefully you have some control over that. Other customers, clients, whoever's on your site might need to control those things. PPE and what that looks like, and Carrie did an excellent job explaining the difference already between what we normally consider PPE and the face covering. And I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion, most likely. And then cleaning and disinfecting again. And then the last bullet point here is obviously there's a wide variety of exposures from any site. It's going to vary greatly. So it's going to be incumbent upon you to evaluate your specific job site. We can give you some best practices, but it's going to be so widespread, different potentially from site to site. You have to do your own evaluations at some point and look maybe to a third party to assist with that. Okay, next. So on the return to work plan here, we've listed out some of the responsibilities you could include in your plan. This is specific for superintendents, foreman, could be others as well. But then there's the importance of communicating all the aspects of the COVID-19 plan, but specifically here, ensuring folks when they come to work that they're well when they come to work, and getting out to them what that looks like. If they're feeling ill, they're going to be sent home for the testing that Carrie mentioned, all of that. And then the responsibility of the foreman and others, superintendent, whoever, to ensure hand washing stations are well stocked, but not just hand washing, any other controls you have in place, ensure that all is taking place. On the next slide, we'll see responsibilities of a safety professional. Now, sometimes that can be a dual role between a foreman. He might have safety responsibilities. Some of you may be fortunate enough to have a full-time safety director or something like that. So they might have some additional responsibilities. The first point here is just keeping up with the CDC and OSHA and whoever else for any information, new things, new changes that come available. And there has been some, you're probably aware of that over time. So this year, there have been some changes in recommendation, guidelines, things like that. So just keeping abreast of that. I'll talk probably about it more later. One way to do that would be signing up for these email lists where they'll send you out periodic emails of changes and news. I'm on the OSHA mailing list, for example, and probably once a week or maybe twice, I'll send out some new information. That's a good way to keep abreast of new info. Training is a part of responsibility for the foreman or the safety professional. This training, we have resources for that. We're helping folks with that, conducting that COVID-19 training. You're not going to be telling folks things they don't know already, most likely, in this training, but the idea is the reminder, putting it in the forefront of their mind, getting this culture, getting this mindset. And then you're going to they want to review hygiene and non-pharmaceutical intervention. That's just a fancy way of saying anything outside of a vaccine or medicine is NPI. So social distancing, PPE, whatever. All right, Carrie. And then this doesn't alleviate responsibilities from everyone else. Employees have responsibility as well. Come to work well, let you know when they're sick, follow any guidelines you have in place. So it doesn't alleviate their responsibilities. They have responsibilities as well and need to be required to follow whatever guidelines you put in place. Okay. You do need to be aware of, for employees, especially when they need to seek medical attention. CDC has recommended guidelines. I won't have Carrie click over there today, but you can go to their website. A lot of guidelines of when to seek medical attention, what that looks like, how to protect ourselves the best we can. But do be aware of potential emergency situations, all dealing with on the right-hand column there, trouble breathing, blue lips, things like that, all dealing with respiratory issues that may result from COVID-19. So just be aware of those emergency situations that could occur. All right, next. So how do we reduce our risk of exposure? Obviously, we've talked about this some. Stay at home, possibly PPE, whatever that is at your location. Avoiding physical contact, social distancing, 6 feet recommended. More is better, obviously. The training, again, let's get this mindset out there for employees, this culture, where it just becomes natural. We're automatically social distance. We automatically do this hygiene. And respiratory etiquette, I like that term there. And respiratory etiquette basically means cover your cough, or your sneeze. So basically, how you learned in school, your mom might have told you, cover your mouth when you cough. That would be respiratory etiquette. All right, next. So how do we reduce exposure? Some of these things I'm sure you've all heard of. Promoting personal hygiene, cleaning tools, not sharing tools if that can be avoided. My favorite one on the list there is keep in-person meetings as short as possible. I'm always for a short meeting, so I don't think anybody will push back on that. Nor the next one of cleaning portable job site toilets regularly. So I have a client that's what they do. They provide portable toilets, and they said their cleaning schedules increased exponentially in the last weeks. That's what they have gone from like once or twice a week to some 5 days a week. So you might look to your vendors if you're in charge of the portable toilets. They are out there and available to do that kind of thing. Hand sanitizers available, and then of course report COVID exposures, report any other kind of safety concern employees may have. Okay, next. So how do we minimize site exposure? Obviously, sanitation. You can develop a hand washing schedule. Not a bad idea. Again, some of that's common sense, right? Before break, after break, before we eat, anything like that. Want to wash up. I have seen some more and more of that, and maybe those of you that are out on job sites have seen there are hand washing stations more available now than they have in the past. I'm not saying it's 100%, but I've seen some improvement in that area. So that's a 1+, I guess, it's come out of this. All right, next. And then housekeeping in general. Been doing safety for about 20 years now, and it's been my judgment when you see good housekeeping on the site, in general, the safety is good and there's less issues otherwise. So it's no different here with coronavirus, COVID-19. But having a plan, how often we're going to clean these common surfaces, clean touch points, whether it's handrails, buttons on an elevator, doorknobs, whatever. But have that, you need to have thought about that ahead of time, how we're going to control these exposures. Okay, next. These are those non-pharmaceutical interventions, these NPIs, fancy way of saying anything about medicine, social distancing, maybe staggering work schedules. I know scheduling can be difficult in construction anyway, but it's more emphasized now with this virus. Some people running skeleton crews. Just any way we can avoid personal contact, sharing tools, all of that. Okay, next. I did want to throw in one slide here about transportation. The main concern will here would be these first 2 points, encouraging workers not to share vehicles. Again, that can be a real challenge. I've seen it across the board here. I've seen, instead of having 6 folks riding a crew cab truck, maybe one in the front, one in the back. I've seen masks required in trucks. I've seen windows have to be down, whatever. I've seen a lot of different things. But of course, the best would be to engineer that exposure out, which we always talk about in safety, and that would be not have folks ride together at all. Again, that can be a challenge, but you can see that would be probably the best method of protecting folks, not ride sharing and things like that. Okay, next. We talked a little bit about managing contractors. So managing anybody that comes onto your job site, and subcontractors that may work for you will be one of those. So controlling that exposure, looking at their safety protocols, make sure they know your safety protocols. What you would hate to happen is you've done all this work to protect your employees, and then but your subcontractor's not doing anything, and expose your employees, and everybody's exposed. So trying to manage that, and it's no different with any other safety rule we've had in the past. We've always encouraged that. But again, the same with this COVID-19, managing our subcontractors and those exposures. All right, next. So cleaning and disinfecting is look like a lot of different things. There are guidelines from OSHA, CDC, all those are available. Some on the right-hand column there, just some things to consider. What are we going to clean? Public entry doors, elevator buttons, break rooms, workspaces, whatever your job site is like. And of course, those times are going to vary how often you do that, how many folks are in there, how often they're in there, basically just how much it's used. We just need to evaluate that. It's going to vary greatly from job site to job site. We just need to think about that ahead of time. What's our schedule going to look like, and start developing some guidelines around that. Okay, next. So this is that cycle that I talked about. We see this all the time, whether it's quality, production, whatever. We've talked about the planning, so you should have a plan in place, and then you're going to organize how we're going to implement this plan, the organized portion. Then you need to evaluate it at some point, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Is it working? Do we need to make changes? If we need to make changes, that's that respond section of the plan there, or the pie. And then you start all over again. So this is a evolving document in your plan. It's going to change. There's going to be things that work, that don't work. And this is the cycle. So just 30 days, 60 days, reevaluate this plan that you have in place, make sure it's working and protecting your employees. Okay, next. So here's these all have been mentioned already, places we can go for help, for guidelines. OSHA has COVID-19 guidelines, CDC, EEOC, others, Department of Labor in general. So there are resources out there for you to take a look at that can be used as guidelines for your workplace. Okay, next. And then we also have guidelines and helps as well. We developed in-house hub and developed checklists, sample plans, trainings. We have all this information available to folks that we developed in-house. We've got like 50 risk services folks like myself throughout the country, and a lot of years of experience there, and really jumped in and developed a lot of materials for our clients. I think that might be it. Next. Yep. So that's it. I'll turn it back over to Bob.
Shannon, thank you very much. I learned a lot. Wow. This is the time for questions. You can either submit questions to me written via the chat feature if you like that discretion, or you can be so bold as to unmute yourself and ask the question directly to any one of our presenters. If you choose that option, please state your name, your company, and where you're from. Give everyone a few minutes to, or a minute or so to contemplate. Kara, as I said before, I used to do HR policy, and a lot of the stuff you talked about was standard HR, especially in terms of the discretion needed for medical. So I found that part absolutely fascinating. You're absolutely right in terms of the seriousness, in terms of the requirements the government imposes upon employers to follow certain laws and protect employees' privacy. So I thought that was an excellent part of it.
Well, and I'll tell you what I come across a lot, Bob, is, even HR people are coming to me saying, what are all these new laws? And I think it's important to understand that these aren't new laws. These are a new way of understanding the laws that have existed for years and years and years. And now we're applying them in a new context. The good news, I guess, if it is good news, is back in the early 2000s, around, everyone may remember H1N1 and the swine flu, the EEOC issued copious detailed guidance around how to manage a workforce within the rules of discrimination and harassment and ADA in particular with respect to pandemics. And so what we saw in the last 5 months, and amazingly in the first 30 to 60 days, was massive updating regulatory guidance that already existed, and it was merely modified to be more applicable to today's current circumstances. But there's nothing new here. It's really understanding the laws as they apply to this scenario.
I thought the one thing in terms of asking the employers who are trying to be good natured, helping those over 65, and ADA, also with the pregnancies, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. That was fascinating as well too, in terms of even you're trying to be helpful, the law still applies, and if that supersedes in terms of one's that was fascinating. I don't speak over anyone, and no one else has actually volunteered, and I don't see anything on our chat feature, so I'm going to wrap this one up as another presenter who is absolutely fabulous in terms of covering everything because there aren't any questions. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. Carrie, Shannon, Rand, thank you very much for your time today to present this information to our guests. We'd also like to thank Hub International for the membership support of NUCA and our educational webinar. They came highly recommended from our NUCA Middle Tennessee chapter, and I'm very glad that they could present at this time this important material to fellow NUCA members in a national audience format. A recording of this webinar we made available to all registrants in the next day or two, and will also be available on the nuca.com website. That will include the PowerPoint presentation as well too. We'll also have it in a PDF form. And thank you for your time today to join us for Webinar Wednesday and supporting NUCA. Our next webinar will be held Wednesday, August 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern, titled Distracted Driving, presented by NUCA National Partner Licks. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and please enjoy the rest of your week.